Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Luke McBain. I'm here with my brother Chad McBain, and together we're two brothers and Bitcoin. And hi, Chad, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I just recently saw this image here, and for some reason, just by looking at this image, I was, let's say, surprised, or there was something where I felt, oh, wow, there is still a lot of potential in the Bitcoin space. I think last time we said we're still at the beginning of this. Hard to believe, but
Right.
I think sort of like if I look at this image, I sort of understand why we are at the beginning. If we look at the distribution of Bitcoin in the world, like who owns Bitcoin, and obviously this is just a rough snapshot, and you know probably it needs more differentiation. But maybe I just point out quickly, of course, like it says here, 17.6% are lost, like cannot be recovered, are on some hard drive, which is on some landfill or
Right.
has gone forever. 57% are in the ownership of individuals. And then we come to this part here, corporations, Bitcoin ETF, and government, and we say 3.6% are in the hand of corporations, 3.9% now are within Bitcoin ETFs, and 2.7% are owned by governments. Uh, which is also interesting. I mean, it's an interesting number. It's not bad, 2.7%, although the governments tend or seem to be hostile, but we'll get to that later on in the conversation if that hostility now is changing and where that is changing. We've seen some changes, but I thought, wow, isn't that interesting that such a low percentage overall are owned by these, let's say, larger entities like corporations and governments? So there seems to be still some room for improvement, or still seems to be potential in that space if you consider how low the ownership is just within those three entities compared to the overall total of existing Bitcoin. I wonder how
Right.
you see that.
Yeah. Well, I find it quite interesting as well. I think it speaks to a few different things, in my opinion. One of them being, we hear some of the detractors suggesting that Bitcoin is not decentralized. Um, just judging by what I see here, especially in terms of the amount in the Bitcoin ETFs combined, I would say this is a fairly recent graph. So if almost 60% of all Bitcoin is controlled by individuals across the globe, that's about as decentralized as you can get. You've got another 3.4 in the miners and 3.9 in the ETFs. So you've got basically almost another 6.5%. So really, you're looking at 63%, maybe as much as 64%. And there's the Satoshi wallet. So I didn't add that in. So actually, you're close to 70% of all Bitcoin globally is owned by individuals, either with self-custody through the ETF, or of course, Satoshi's original wallet, which probably is never going to be moved, but he or she or they is an individual. So therefore, yeah, 70% of all Bitcoin is owned by individuals. So therefore, it not only is it completely decentralized, it will remain decentralized probably till the end of time. The other thing that I think is interesting is the lost Bitcoins. I actually think it's a bit higher than that. I think it's probably more like 20 percent to 25%, but time will tell on that. But even if we just take those numbers and round up maybe to 20%, we're probably looking at well over 4 million Bitcoin that will never be available to be bought. So we're not we're not really dealing with 21 million Bitcoin. We're probably dealing with 17 million or even 16 and change that's available in the world. So it's much more scarce than even Satoshi envisioned at this point. So I think those things are all interesting. The other thing ETFs just started in January. So I think January 11th was the launch of the ETFs. They already own roughly 4% of all global Bitcoin, which is over 800,000. We're talking about 5 months. What are they going to own in 5 years? You know, I'm not saying that they're going to add 800,000 every 5 months, but it wouldn't surprise me to see the ETFs own several million Bitcoin in the next few years, which means obviously some more will be mined, but not a lot. So there's a lot of people who are probably going to make some interesting money in US dollar figures in holding the asset. There's just not going to be enough Bitcoin out there to go around over the next 5 to 10 years, in my opinion, for all the people that are going to want it. I mean, the ETFs show the demand for Bitcoin in a regulated, structured environment. So the demand is there. It's just a question of governments getting on board more so than they already have, and also society understanding the power of Bitcoin and how it can help them in their lives.
I mean, I think in terms of individual ownership, there's a little bit of criticism there. I just found another graph. It's a little bit older, but I assume that the distribution hasn't changed much, which is that here it says 95% of addresses own 3.4% of Bitcoin. So in terms of decentralization or ownership, the majority of people own basically a minority of Bitcoin. Like, it seems the majority of Bitcoin is owned by a few individuals, actually, and the majority is held by many individuals, like, yeah, just normal people
Yeah,
like you and
I
me.
think it's more dispersed now. Just looking at the source, it's 2017, so it
Hmm.
is an older graph. But let's just go with a figure of maybe 80% or something like that. So it still seems as though Bitcoin is controlled by a certain amount of people, but you can't control Bitcoin um, because it's free and open. So what all that really says to me is the early adopters bought Bitcoin, but you don't have to own a whole Bitcoin. As a matter of fact, most people now, it's probably not realistic to own a whole Bitcoin if you're just starting to buy now. But Bitcoin is broken down into, well, I guess the smallest denominator for Bitcoin currently that most people would consider buying would be a Satoshi. Well, there's 100 million Satoshis in an actual full Bitcoin. So I think the distribution of Bitcoin as is about to become a whole lot more diverse as people start to understand it. It becomes more mainstream, and of course, people can invest in it now. Not only in the US ETFs, but we have ETFs here in Canada, and you're seeing ETFs launched all over the world. So I think the distribution, although slanted, is really just early adopters, no different than in 2009 or 10 saying that, you know, a certain amount of people owned iPhones and Blackberries. I mean, the vast majority of the population 15 years ago did not own a smartphone. So I don't look at that as a bad thing. I just think that's what happens when new technology takes hold in society. You're going to have early adopters. A lot of those people are going to sell over time, and a lot more people are going to purchase over time. So those numbers will definitely change quite a bit.
I mean, coming back to the fact that actually only 2.7% are owned by government. I mean, perhaps these figures aren't quite up to date, but let's say roughly that is the case. On one hand, that doesn't seem a lot, but already I was surprised that governments hold Bitcoin, although many governments seemed either indifferent or critical or hostile towards Bitcoin. And on the other hand, I was going
Yeah.
like, well, but some of them are already holding Bitcoin, it seems like, and 2.7% is not nothing. And so there is already something going on in that space, and it doesn't seem to be communicated. At least I wasn't really aware of how much
Right.
governments do hold Bitcoin, because I thought up to now, well, they are just simply not, they are basically hostile towards it because it's seen as some sort of competition to their own
Well,
currency.
I actually think this graph is fairly up to date. The reason I say that, although we don't have a source date on it, what we do have is the Bitcoin ETFs there at 3.9%. And I happen to know that the combined ETFs hold about 850,000 Bitcoin, which would be roughly 4%. So I think this graph is actually fairly recent. Now, to your point, 2.7% owned by government. So there's a couple of things I'm going to say about this, but the first thing I'm going to say, and I think this is important for people to understand, don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And what I mean by that, and that probably could go for anything in life, quite frankly, people, governments, businesses. But in this case, to your point, most governments have come out hostile towards Bitcoin or ambivalent. It's very few have come out in favor of it. But most are hostile. Most European governments have been hostile towards it. Obviously, the U.S. government's been hostile towards it. And both parties, by the way, the Trump administration was hostile towards it during his first term. We'll see what happens if he gets another term. And the Biden administration has been very hostile towards it. Having said that, the Bitcoin that they've accumulated over the years through, through basically getting a hold of Bitcoin through people that are committing fraud and stuff like that and charging them, sending them to jail, they've seized this Bitcoin. I find it ironic that they really haven't sold much of it. So if they think it's this horrible thing, or they see no value in it, they say it's worthless, it's going to zero, why doesn't the U.S. government sell it when it's at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, $70,000, or any government for that matter? And look, they sell some, but they don't, if they have, let's say 10,000 Bitcoin in a seizure of some fraudulent exchange or something, they tend not to sell 10,000 Bitcoin. They might sell a little bit of it, but they don't sell much. And I find it very interesting. The U.S. government has been holding on to Bitcoin since at least 2012, 13. When an old black market site called the Silk Road was shut down. The U.S. government seized, I think, like 100,000 or more Bitcoin from that. And now I think they hold maybe 250,000 Bitcoin. So why haven't they sold that Bitcoin in 11 years if they thought it was worthless? So it's just interesting. I don't have an answer to that. I find it interesting as well as you do. But I would say watch what they do, not what they say. And the fact that they've been holding Bitcoin and other governments around the world, like the Chinese government, despite banning it in 2021, these governments don't seem to be in a hurry to get rid of it. I find that fascinating. Sarcasm intended.
Right. I mean, here just talking about China, I just maybe wanted to show that also. This is also just a little bit older news, 2021, but I couldn't find a more recent chart. And there was this question of who holds all the Bitcoin. And basically, 2021, the Chinese government was number 2.
Yeah, almost
Interesting.
200,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And we don't have a more recent chart. I know they did sell some of that, but from my understanding, they still own well into the 6 figures. And now with Hong Kong opening up ETFs for Bitcoin and crypto, wouldn't surprise me if the Chinese government isn't adding to their stake. Yeah. So I have no proof of that, but 2021, when this was done, was also the year they banned Bitcoin. And last year, they opened up trading in Hong Kong, and just recently they approved Bitcoin ETFs in Hong Kong. So I would think that the Chinese government, even if it's arm's length, is still holding and accumulating Bitcoin.
Speaking of, we're going a little bit back and forth also in Bitcoin history, and just talking also about who's holding it and who's interested in it and how that is changing over time, and especially when it comes to the governments. I mean, we have now this news, which I found a little bit cryptic, which was, we talked about that last time, Biden administration to participate in crucial Bitcoin strategy roundtable next month. I couldn't quite figure out why this is crucial. The primary objective of this meeting is to establish strategies that ensure the continued innovation and dominance of blockchain and Bitcoin technology in the United States. I guess, yeah, it goes on, like, has identified this as a critical platform for policymakers and visionaries in the blockchain sector, making it one of the most significant such gatherings to date.
Right.
And this responds to the Trump's pro-Bitcoin action. So like, apparently their hand was forced because, as far as I know, the Biden administration was rather critical of Bitcoin, but now this has seemed to have shifted.
Yeah.
And when we talk about this, it's interesting, the wording dominance of blockchain and Bitcoin technologies in the United States. So something seems, the ground seems to be shifting in both parties.
It
Yeah.
does seem to be shifting, and I want to give full credit to a couple people on the political side, at least in the U.S. The first one is Robert F. Kennedy, RFK Jr. When he announced his presidency, his wanting to run for president of the United States, his candidacy. He stated at that time one of the things was that he believed in Bitcoin and in certain cryptocurrencies or crypto technologies, I guess. And he also believed, excuse me, in self-custody, that the individual should have the right to hold their assets and their commodities. Now, another candidate who was running in the Republican side, because RFK Jr. was running as a Democrat, but they seem to have forced him out of that. So now he's an independent. But somebody on the Republican side, Vivek Ramaswamy, was very pro-Bitcoin. And I believe he's now one of the advisors to Trump. So I'm sure there's something with that. I know Trump has a couple of other advisors who are very pro-Bitcoin. And I think what is happening here, what we're seeing is game theory maybe playing out, where it started with RFK Jr. About a year ago. And very recently, in the last, say, month or 6 weeks, Donald Trump coming out and saying that he thinks Bitcoin has a place for American citizens, and American citizens want Bitcoin, that tens of millions of American citizens currently hold Bitcoin. And he thinks they should be allowed to do what they want, and he will support that, and he'll support self-custody. So I think that's a huge change from when Trump was last in office. And to your point, and I guess the point of this article, I think the Biden administration now has two essentially candidates who've stated that they're pro-Bitcoin, or at least pro-Bitcoin in the sense that Americans should be allowed to purchase it, hold it, and custody it. And, you know, I don't know what Trump's polling numbers are right now, but from what I understand, they're pretty much neck and neck with the Biden. And then RFK Jr., I believe, is polling in double digits. Now, you know, what does that mean? RFK Jr. alone, in terms of the voting public, probably has 15 to 20 million voters out there right now who are supporting him, according to the polls. And then Trump and Biden, of course, are probably in that 65 to 70 million range. So if we just take Biden's out and we add RFK Jr.'s and Trump's together, at least in terms of their pro-Bitcoin policy, we probably have close to 100 million voters that are on the voting for candidates that are pro-Bitcoin, which kind of leaves the Democrats and the Biden administration out in the cold with a fairly large voting bloc. And a recent survey, and look, this was one survey, so take it with a grain of salt, but a recent survey of, I believe, Michigan voters who had decided who they were going to vote for. This survey said in the top five, so their fifth, I'm just trying to remember this correct, their fifth most important consideration was crypto. So I don't know if that would be the case in other states or with other voters, because, but I did find that interesting. If the Biden administration is getting any reports that it's even in the top 10 things that people are concerned about. They it would be very politically strategic to change their position from being antagonistic and start to support, if not outright support the industry, certainly support the idea that people should be allowed to buy it and hold it and trade it and do what they want. So I think that's what we're seeing with the Biden administration. There's been a very anti-Bitcoin and anti-crypto stance for the last few years, mostly from Senator Elizabeth Warren, but she holds a lot of power within the administration, particularly when it comes to financial services. And I think the Democrats are starting to realize that this is going to hurt them in November if they continue to be antagonistic towards Bitcoin and crypto at large as well. And just part of in part of that article, we didn't pull it up here, but just this week, the Security and Exchange Commission has dropped its case against Ethereum, which I know isn't Bitcoin, but is probably the leading crypto outside of Bitcoin. And the SEC is backing off on its case against Ethereum being a security. Well, that would suggest to me, again, that the Biden administration is putting pressure on the SEC to back off, because this is the election's only, 4 or 5 months away now, and it's getting serious. And I think it's a lot closer in the polls than they were expecting. And I think they need votes wherever they can get.
For me, it's also interesting because, as we know, things which develop in the United States somehow always find their way also to Europe and Germany, where I am at right now. And so your hypothesis is, and it's proven in the news, is that Bitcoin now has an influence over politics and how politicians view Bitcoin. And if they want to satisfy their voters, they have to deal with it somehow and start dealing with it in a more positive light, because that's what voters want. So far, this has not happened yet in Germany. I just can say that, but I think that's just for those who are viewing from Germany. Perhaps that is something which could happen more in the future, looking forward, because usually, again, developments come over from the United States, North America, back to Europe. We're sort of out of time, unfortunately, but it was a very interesting conversation as always, and I just want to thank you for that.
My pleasure, as always.
Talk to you next time.
Okay, see ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.